Good evening. Hi, hello, buenas noches, boa noite. My name is Rodrigo Moura. I am the chief curator at El Museo del Barrio in New York. And it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to tonight's program. To celebrate the final week of Taller Boricua, a political print shop in New York, we are honored to host a conversation about US Latinx graphic arts and activism across the country. Our participants tonight include Marcos Dimas, Taller Boricua's founder and its current executive director, whose work is prominently presented in the exhibition and who served as a key advisor to my curatorial work in putting the show together. Marvella Muro, Director of Artistic Programs and Education at Self-Help Graphics and Art in Los Angeles, a leading Chicano institution with a parallel history with El Museo and Taller Boricua itself. And Miguel Luciano, artist, researcher, and activist whose work is embedded with the same histories and put them forward in the present. As we will see, some of the issues that the works relates to are the same still today. Right? This talk will be centered on the intersection of artistic and political practices, both historically and today. And I'll be the moderator tonight. In conjunction with this show, El Museo has launched a new virtual presentation of the exhibition that will extend the reach of this landmark show, which marks the 50th anniversary of this Harlem-based collective studio and alternative space, Taller Boricua, or Puerto Rican workshop. So please enjoy and share this valuable resource online that will outlive the exhibition. So we will share the link on the chat box. Just before I start presenting, I would also like to thank several people who made tonight's program possible, including Elena Vidal, Christian Martir, and Clara Diaz from Museo's public program team, and Noel Valentin, permanent collection manager, who co-organized this exhibition with me and opened my eyes to some of the works that the show puts together. Taller Boricua Political Printshop in New York. It's the first exhibition that El Museo del Barrio organizes of Taller Boricua in over 30 years. It marks the 50th anniversary of Taller as a very esteemed organization in New York, a very important focal point of the Puerto Rican, New Yorican arts movement in New York City. This exhibition is focused on the first 12 years of existence of Taller Boricua as a collective workshop, as a alternative space serving the Puerto Rican and the Latino community in New York during the 70s and beyond, including some works of the early 80s. The exhibition departs from common history, common mythos, common values between the organizations, El Museo del Barrio and Taller Boricua, who are often described as twin organizations because they were founded around the same time in 1969. And they were also two different manifestations of the self-determination of the Puerto Rican community in New York. One in the artist community, and the other one in a broader cultural realm. So just to get us started, I would like just give a short overview of the show. As I say, the platform that we're launching tonight has a very comprehensive, actually has all exhibition views, all the reproduction of all works that compose the exhibition. But I want to just, as an introduction to tonight's panel, talk a little bit about this common history between the two organizations. So this is an image of the museum location on 3rd Avenue during the exhibition La Herencia Artística de Puerto Rico, or the art heritage of Puerto Rico, that was co-organized between El Museo and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And I know that Miguel Luciano will talk about this show a little bit too. But this was the time when the museum was occupying a storefront on 3rd Avenue, and also Taller Boricua was occupying another storefront on 2nd Avenue. And this is a picture of Hiram Maristani. That's part of the exhibition, where we see the facade of the facade painting by artists, and also Taller Boricua's founder Adrian Garcia, and some of the posters that are shown in the windows of that Taller's location. They speak of a spirit of putting images forward, putting images in circulation, and thinking about how art can exist in a coincided space of a public space, of community space, of a political space at the end, right? So this is the poster of the first exhibition that El Museo organized of Taller Boricua in 1972. And in this show, we're gonna see a lot of ephemera posters that were both created by Taller's members to their shows at El Museo or to other museums programs. So in this case, this is Marcos Dimas' first exhibition at El Museo, the poster that he designed, with a very do-it-yourself, countercultural spirit. Also, Marcos is going to talk about this intersection of art and activism in his work tonight. But Marcos has been a very, probably is the most widely shown artist, or the most represented artist in the exhibition. This is, for instance, it's an artist with a very high erudition in graphic language. So this is, like, for instance, like a parody of Picasso poster that he created for a museum program in 1980, when he was also acting as a film curator at El Museo, film programmer, I should say. And this is another poster of another audiovisual program that the museum presented under Marcos' supervision in 1981, where we can see also a very beautiful reference to his own work with frottage and indigenous heritage as part of the work. Also in the exhibition, and I think this is going to be a very recurring topic tonight, the idea of a political education through the posters, through the images, through the iconography that this works put together. So this is another archival image in the exhibition, where Marcos on the right is seen at work in the workshop with the late artist Jorge Soto Sanchez. So several of the posters, they were really serving the purpose and of providing a political education for the diaspora in terms of political struggle of Puerto Rico for independence. So there's several political effigies that appear in these posters, more recurringly so Don Pedro Albizu Campos, also commemorative images such as this one on the Massacre de Ponce. Lolita Lebron is another recurring figure, and several of Marcos Dimas. So this is a very substantial body of works, of posters that Marcos present in the exhibition. Also very timely representation of Che Guevara in his deathbed, Vive Che, and solidarity gesture to other anti-imperialist struggles in Latin America. And also, as part of this political educations, the education around cultural heritage, and an increasing interest of Marcos on an ethno-aesthetic in his work. So This is a serigraphic print that speaks of this. And here I presented together with one of the very early lino cuts by Rafael Tufino, where he presents the Taino figure of a pintadeira as an indigenous, non-European, non-art historic, canonically art historical trope of printmaking through the indigenous practice of the pintadeiras, which is like a stamp making. So that claims another genealogy for printmaking through indigenous heritage. So as we can see, this work is very complex in the way it puts together, it puts in play several references to different genealogies, to different cultures in a very tense way. Also, these are another example of like monotypes or frottage or these rubbings that were made directly on the petroglyphs in Puerto, the Taino petroglyphs in Puerto Rico. So this is another way, another possible epistemology for printmaking, again, through the work of Marcos Dimas. And we can see how also he embedded, you know, his painterly practice with also increasing interest for like an ethno-aesthetics, drew on the Taino heritage and a non-European, non-Eurocentric art historical genealogy. So this is what I wanted to share with you. Just want to thank you so much, Marcos, Marvella, and Miguel for being with us tonight. And without much further ado, I would like to invite Marcos for his presentation. Thank you all for your attention.
I got involved with some artists that were at the School of Visual Arts, namely Adrian Garcia, Martin Rubio, which is a sculptor, and Armando Soto was also part of the group. And we at the School of Visual Arts, the Art Workers Coalition used to meet at the School of Visual Arts. A lot of the, well, not a lot, a few of the teachers were part of the art workers. So we went to some of the meetings of the art workers, and there we met Rafael Ortiz, Rafael Montañez Ortiz, and we started to get involved with the art workers during a lot of demonstrations. We demonstrated against the Museum of Modern Art. At that time, the Museum of Modern Art was exhibiting an exhibition of the Surrealists, and the Art Workers Coalition took a position that the Museum of Modern Art was co-opting an anti-war movement for their own personal gains, because originally the Surrealist movement started out as an anti-war movement. And so we also were involved in demonstrating against the Museum of the Metropolitan Museum with their exhibition Harlem on My Mind. Harlem in My Mind was an exhibition about Harlem, but it excluded a lot of the contemporary artists. So through that demonstration, we made an alliance with African-American artists, which were at that time developing the Studio Museum in Harlem. And the Studio Museum in Harlem was basically a studio on 125th Street and Fifth Avenue on the second floor, loft, where each artist had a studio. So one thing led to another. We were in a series of demonstrations throughout New York City, and eventually the art workers broke up into like 3 different factions. There was the Black Afro-Americans, there was the Puerto Ricans, and then there was a white section of the art workers. We decided to take on the plight of non-representation of Puerto Rican and Black artists in the mainstream museums, which included the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of the City of New York, which was right in our neighborhood in East Harlem. Throughout, we decided on creating a day without art based on in solidarity with the Kent State Massacre, where a few students were killed by the National Guard. And during that protest, we decided to go protest in front of the Museum of the City of New York, which was in East Harlem. And coming into East Harlem, we met the organizations like the Real Great Society and the Urban Planning Studio. And those organizations were developing in the community. And we basically were grandfathered in with a space to create the Taller Boricua in East Harlem by the Real Great Society, which included Harry Quintana, Marimar Benitez, who was Harry Quintana's wife, was working with Rafael Ortiz in the Museo del Barrio. And then during that time, we also became part of the advisory committee of the Museo del Barrio. So anyway, all these things started to gel together into a movement, basically. And it was an act of coincidence that the first location that we acquired from the Rio Grande Society for our Taller Boricua was across the street from the Young Lords political party. And then we met Hiram Maristani and with a photographer, and we met practically all the people that were involved with the Young Lords political party. And so one of the first, the first poster that came out of the Taller Boricua, which was named then Taller Alma Boricua, Taller de la 111, 111th Street workshop, was created by Rafael Tufino. And he created that for a demonstration against the UN, planting the position of Puerto Rican independence. And one of the second ones was when Julio Roldan, which was a young lord, was killed by the police. And then we also did posters for Julio Roldan. So there was that relationship. We fell right in the middle of East Harlem and into the political climate that was happening during that time. Also, as part of the art workers, we did a lot of things. We were able to get the museums to give up a free day for the community and for the people in general in the museums. And we also managed to get the State Council on the Arts to set up a department to fund the community arts-based art centers. So from there we went on. Immediately we created a printmaking workshop, and we were able to incorporate Rafael Tufino and Carlos Osorio, who were then part of the Friends of Puerto Rico, the Society of Friends of Puerto Rico, which were housed on 30th Street and 3rd Avenue. and Amalia Guerrero was leading the organization, and she would put in a lot of cultural activities in the building, and we managed to get some space for artist residencies in the building. Carlos Osorio had a studio, and his main task was to create the graphics that were used by the organization. And eventually we managed to get the two artists to come up to East Harlem to join the Taller Boricua, which was then founded by Manuel Otero, Adrian Garcia, Martin Rubio, Armando Soto, and myself. So we needed them because we felt we needed a tie-in to Puerto Rico, to the Puerto Rican culture. You see, up to then we were all assimilated. We were young Puerto Ricans who grew up in New York City, and we were assimilated to the melting pot concept. And by that time, with all the turmoil going on and influenced by the Black movement for justice, we also decided to look into our own heritage and start analyzing our artwork. I mean, by then I was heavily into doing pop art because I was influenced by the pop artists at the School of Visual Arts, and I studied with Chuck Close and a few other heavyweights from that went on to become the mainstream of American art. So my artwork was heavily influenced by pop art, but then I started researching the Taino art of Puerto Rico by first being influenced by some art pictures and things that Rafael Ortiz had gathered. He gathered some pictures and examples of Puerto Rican Taino art, and I had never seen that except for when I was a kid in Puerto Rico, when my uncle had a collection of little monkey heads and whatever, but I never gave it any thought till I rediscovered them and started working, incorporating those pieces into my art. And I created that. And at the same time, we were developing our own aesthetics, our own personal aesthetics, which dealt a lot with the influence of that we were now acquiring from Puerto Rico, with be the Taino or the African influence. And Puerto Rico had always been leaning on the influences of the Spanish, the colonial, the colonialists, and things like the Taino influences and the African influence were degraded. They weren't looked at as valuable art history till Don Ricardo Alegría decided to take that up on himself and started unearthing a lot of the artwork of the Tainos. And so that was also another of our influence, Don Ricardo Alegría and his studies into Taino art.
Marcos, I would like to ask you a question, or if because I think it's going to be very interesting to pick up on the Taino and El Taino aesthetic that you guys sort of forged in New York after also Miguel's presentation that's going to touch upon some of that too. But I wanted to ask you just before you wrap up on the importance of the print shop, of the silk screen, and the idea of the posters, of something that you always mention as very important, also coming from the Divatco experience through Osorio and Trufino, but specifically on the posters that we have several of in the show. if you could elaborate a little bit, a few minutes on that for us.
Definitely, yeah, because that was the other important faction of the taller was the printmaking, the posters, because we felt that you needed to do posters to reach the masses. The medium lent itself for reaching the masses. So within that posters, we touched on a lot of the theories, the aesthetics, and the history of Puerto Rico. And we would do this because we would take out exhibitions to the community, take out a truck with panels and set up exhibitions throughout. And then talk to the people and talk to the kids and talk to the elders and start dialogues using the art as a vehicle for education to start having them learn about their Puerto Rican culture, their ancestral heritage, and we created a lot of posters which dealt specifically with that imagery. And we also started doing posters for other organizations that were doing exhibitions, that were doing projects in the schools. A lot of the universities started to do projects which incorporated the Taino history or the historical background of Puerto Rico, or just in general. So we would partner with those colleges and create a poster, and then maybe take an exhibition out to the college, and then bring the poets together, and then bring the Los Pleneros de la 110, which is a neighborhood plena group, over to play. So it was a holistic environment of culture and the arts, you know. So printmaking was well, we still do printmaking. We don't do printmaking in the same vein because the times are not the same and the energy is not the same. But that was a very important phase.
Perhaps that's a good point for us to turn on to Marvella and ask her to share a little of her presentation on the self-help graphics, and because it's a parallel history, and also obviously the printmaking component has always played a major role.
I like to always also say that during the early years, some of our members went over to California and traded posters with self-help graphics, and brought back posters from self-help graphics that we had in our exhibitions. And that was around 1974, 75, early 70s. Yeah.
Well, we now have all of our collection from our offsite storage at self-help at the building. So I'm going to dig for those. And then we also have an archive at UC Santa Barbara, so they may be there and be really interesting to find them. But I've been at self-help for now going to 2 years, and I think I've only discovered or gone through just such a small fraction of the work that has been printed at self-help. So, you know, I have a long way to go. Rodrigo, should I share? Okay. So first off, Rodrigo, I want, and Marcos, I want to thank El Museo for inviting self-help graphics. And it's great to meet you, Miguel. I'm getting a flashback because my graduate thesis was on alternative spaces. And that was my introduction to El Museo del Barrio. And now that I'm at Self-Help Graphics, I'm learning more about the history of the multiple print studios across the nation and abroad. So this is bringing a lot of flashbacks and just recalling a lot of the things that I spent much of my time reading about. So thank you. And listening to Marcos, and there's no doubt that there's so many parallels within self-help graphics and Taller Boricua's foundation, founded by artists, filling a gap and a need for the artists in the community, a platform for artists of color, predominantly the Puerto Rico community in New York, and here in Los Angeles, it was the Chicano community. And definitely that the two movements or the two organizations were driven by the movements, the larger environmental and political movements outside. The civil rights movement, with in here, the Chicano movement, the moratorium, the high school walkouts, and many of which artists have worked and continue to work at self-help graphics. So we are also reaching our 50th anniversary. And for that, just thinking about back at the thesis that I wrote and the struggles that alternative spaces have faced and face at smaller as organizations, as well as print studios. You know, it's very commendable that both organizations, and actually the three organizations, including self-help, we're still here and we're strong. And so, you know, it's something to be proud about. As we think, as I was invited to talk about self-help graphics, you know, with its 47, 48 years now, you know, there's a lot to cover. Borrowing from what you said, Rodrigo, you know, the Taller, as well as self-help graphics, brings in the artist community, but also the broader community. It's a place where so many individuals, events have happened, and the cuna of many of the things that happen out in the community through the arts. So I'm going to share a brief bird's eye view of self-help graphics, history, a timeline, and it ends in 2018, where we are purchasing or when we're negotiating to purchase our current home, which is in Boyle Heights. And we begin in 1970-71 with Sister Karen Vocalero, who was also a prolific artist, a printer, along with Carlos Bueno and Antonio Ibanez, two queer artists from Mexico, who together began printing in her garage. And they also found different venues to exhibit the work. The first exhibition was at El Mercadito, which still exists and is a place where you have so many vendors and food post. We became incorporated in 1973. And also, much like the conversations that have continued to happen of exclusion, that's also has happened throughout the years about Chicano art, Chicanx arts, Latino artists being excluded from the stories at larger institutions. And I think ASCO was ASCO, the collective, was a great example of pushing that barrier of confronting specifically the LA County Museum and making them the Latino artist visible. So I do think that the Silkscreen Studio is like I mentioned earlier, la cuna of self-help graphics. Here I'm sharing some images of Sister Karen, the founder, in this top picture with the former master printer, Stephen Grace, and they're working on her print for the first atelier. So although they printed early on, individual artists printed early on, they formalized the studio and the art practice within the studio and a process in 1983 with the first atelier, which is the photograph you see down here. And then this photograph to the right is a photograph of one of the meetings that Sister Karen had before the artist began printing, listing the expectations, but also establishing a mentorship process. Thinking about the silk screen studio and providing these resources is also an active activism, I believe, because these resources were not available to this community, and they were making this effort to make this happen. This is an example, going back to the print and thinking about the Taino influence that the Puerto Ricans had in New York. This is also an example of how the Chicano artists were influenced and embodying the indigenous culture and imagery and tradition back into their own practice. You obviously see here very pop contemporary imagery from 1980s, but then you also have a combination of those indigenous imagery. Irena Cervantes, this is Irena Cervantes' work, and I think here you see different imagery of indigenous culture, but I think this is, you can see here she's wearing a glove, and this is in reference to the Aztec sacrifices, and the Aztecs would skin their the people and wear the skin over them. But then you have this very contemporary bracelet that a lot of the pochas and chicanas used to wear. So that's again going back to revisiting and really adopting the indigenous culture. And then here you will have, very proud image of the family. You can see that this is probably a group of a family of braceros, of all the Mexicans that were coming to bring abroad and to the US to work on the railroads. Today, we continue using the Silkscreen Studio to address the political issues that are affecting us, very much relevant in the work that we do. This is 4 artists and 8 works within a larger atelier called Utopia Dystopia that invited 26 artists to do a print representing both Utopia Dystopia. This is in response to the 2016 administration or elections, and knowing and foreseeing what was to come and what was already happening. So here, the attack on the public schools, and there was another teacher strike, the mass family separations on the border, the continuing stripping of environmental policies to protect the land, and also here the rise of gun control. And here with Kay Brown, you have a listing of early signs of fascism and signs of democracy. I mean, this one's the most frontal or straightforward imagery, but throughout the years, throughout the 70s till today, we continue seeing through our prints as being used as the platform for this activism and being a voice for the people. And I think that also in the system that Self-Help Graphics has, as in splitting the print edition to 2, is also a source of empowerment for the artists, for them to be able to sell and earn money from those sales, which was the reason that this process was established. And then last year, as part of the census 2020, I mean, all the rhetoric that had happened, it really scared the communities, the Latino communities, the threat that they were going to be, if they participated, they were going to be deported, really made a dent in participation, on top of the fact of COVID, making this much more difficult. Here we hired or we commissioned 3 artists to create empowering images to really invoke people to participate. But not only did we do this print studios, we also went out into our community through workshops and distribution of flyers with the facts of what a census is and how to participate. Continuing with the print and the Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead is another anchor program for self-help graphics. We started, self-help graphics presented the, or has been celebrating the Day of the Dead since the early 1970s. And I believe this is the first poster, I may be wrong, but I believe this is the first announcement poster which began the tradition of having posters every year commissioned to announce the Day of the Dead. The Day of the Dead was founded with the impetus of responding to the vast number of men of color dying in Vietnam, and also police, the vast number of men being killed by the police. And so you see this poster here, you know, you have Jesus holding the heart, but then you have an image taken from a newspaper of a recent Latino being killed. So we are self-help graphics actively discusses and is always very intentional about discussing what the Day of the Dead is and how we began it. You know, I know today it's very commercialized and very popular, which is great, and it's great that it is very much accepted by or celebrated. But I think we always have to go back and understand why we do this, the cultural and the traditional, but then with self-help graphics, that extra layer of this is an opportunity to address the things that we are witnessing. Here, for example, this is ASCO, one of the members of ASCO dressed as a bomb. There's another photograph that I could not find, and they were dressed as a syringe. And this was in response to the high number of AIDS victims. We, as part of our Day of the Dead, we have a procession, part of mourning. And these are a few examples of it. And then obviously the altares. This is Teatro Campesino. And I did read that Taller Boricua did a lot of posters for the theaters. And I know there are a few posters for Teatro Campesino, which is up in the, I think in the Bay Area. But this is one of those photographs. Oh, sorry, there's a mistake on this. These are 3 altars from 2019. Again, addressing issues that are happening, using this as a platform or an opportunity to address here the stigma against mental health. This gentleman was killed by his brother, who was who suffered a psychotic episode. This altar is by an art collective called Mi Story, addressing issues of the LGBTQ community, and they have photographs of all the LGBT trans vestites and transsexuals who have been killed due to brutal killings. And this is done by our youth committee, and this is in honor of all the youth that have been killed in the have died in the crossing or in the detention centers. This is part of our exhibition from this year. We did have an exhibition. The gallery was closed, but we felt it was important to still move forward, given all the many things that have been happening, that happened last year and continue to happen this year. This is an altar by Consuelo Flores, honoring the essential workers of color who have died of COVID. There's a small with images of the individuals. The Flores de Cempasúchil represent the COVID virus. And then the roots or the trees are going down into the ground. And you have spines of coyotes, which she's referencing that the spine as the essential workers are the spine or the backbone of our society. This altar is created by the youth, the youth center, and they provide services to youth who are crossing the border. And they have images of many who have passed away. This is,
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I just have to be mindful of the time now.
Got it. Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is very interesting also to sort of invite Miguel to jump in terms of, you know, several of these traditions being sort of put into play in a contemporary agenda or in the light of, you know, recent events. So thank you so much. Miguel, would you like to continue the conversation with your presentation?
Sure, yes, I'm sorry for that abrupt transition. I was enjoying hearing the parallels between the two organizations, but I wanted just to first say thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be in here with both Marvella and Marcos. And I also just want to say that, you know, part of this for me is really personal, that, you know, the Museo and the Taller Boricua were huge influences in my life as an artist. And my first solo show in New York was at the Taller Boricua. I had the La Mano Poderosa racetrack and some paintings, and that's how I got to know Marcos. And, you know, these were the two institutions that I came to visit every time I was in New York, as someone who is from Puerto Rico originally, but didn't grow up in New York. I came here about 20 years ago. So it's really an honor to be in conversation with this history. I'm going to share my screen here. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm working on now. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I thought I'd start here at this, the cover of this catalog from 1973, which is the catalog for the art heritage of Puerto Rico, which was the exhibition, the collaborative exhibition between el Museo del Barrio and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So today I'm an artist in residence at the Met in a program called the Civic Practice Project, or the Civic Practice Partnership. And it's a unique residency that is really brand new. I was one of the inaugural residents. There's now 5 of us, amazing group of artists from all different disciplines. And it was a project spearheaded by Sandra Jackson Dumont when she was the head of education at the Met. And the idea was to work with artists who have practices that relate to their own communities, artists who are already working in their own communities, and to think about how they could leverage the resources of an institution like the Met in service of the work we do in our communities, right? And so it's a unique kind of cohort of artists, all of whom have community-based practices, socially engaged practices, and who are committed to civic practice and social justice. So that's the residency context. But where did that begin for me? Well, the first thing I did at the Met was I wanted to find out, you know, where we are, right? Where are we located in this history of the institution? And so this, which, you know, took me immediately to this exhibition. 1973, this show was the first and only significant show of Puerto Rican art at the Met. And in terms of its scope, it was a survey of pre-Columbian work to contemporary work, right? It's really the first and only survey like this at any major museum, and the largest ever of its kind since then, almost 47 years ago. So the catalog features, you know, familiar imagery, right? We saw the atabex rubbing in the drawing that Marcos, or the print that Marcos had. It was a popular image that informed a lot of our cultural institutions at the time. They were really embracing and connecting with our roots, culture, and heritage, right? African and Taino. And so anyway, this has kind of been my starting point at the Met. And and part of it is that we do have Puerto Rican art in the collection there, but not a lot of it. And most of it has never, ever been on exhibit, even what's in the collection. But what you do find, the only kind of touchstones we have are these Taino artifacts, okay? So right now is a unique moment because this exhibition, Arte del Mar, which is about artistic exchange in the Caribbean, Tainos, not just from Puerto Rico, but from really all of the Antilles are represented in kind of an unusual way. It's a fantastic show. It's still up. I recommend people see it. But it features also this this cajoba stand, this Taino cajoba stand that is probably like the most important wooden Taino sculpture that exists. It's one of the very most important Taino wooden sculptures that exists in the world. And it's in the Met's collection, and has been a touchstone for a lot of artists because it's one of the few things on view that represents the Caribbean in our Taino history. So I've been studying this object, have been wanting to figure out ways to work with it. And so one of the first things we did was through the imaging department, create a 3D scan of the object. And through that 3D scan, we were able to mill like a replica, to have a replica carved. And I just started then to produce these replicas that are molds made from the milled positive. It's been a fascinating process, but part of this eventually will lead to a replica object that can exist outside of the museum. And so in my own way, what I'm interested in doing is trying to sort of get closer to these objects and liberate them from these vitrines, right? And return them to a community context where our own people who share in the history and heritage of this culture and this object can actually have direct access to it. So this is a work in progress. These are just images of the replicas in process, but it's amazing. There have never been replica objects made of this Taino semi. So I feel really privileged to be working with some of these objects now. And so this is just one of the kind of works in process in this residency project. Other things I've been making, this is another kind of like a Taino kind of sun symbol adapted to a New York City bike rack that's sort of welded on there here in El Barrio. And that's a way of also kind of remaking the city in our own culture's image as a kind of guerrilla form of public art. References like these trigonolito semis, which are very popular, also in the collection at the Met, have manifested in paintings and other work. And so I also have looked at a lot of this kind of roots imagery of our own culture and history, very much inspired by the way artists in the generation before me did that, and sort of my own way, also translating them through these kind of pop culture forms and pop culture images. Here the semis kind of take revenge against these aguilas, which are kind of vulture-like, in a reference to the vulture funds, the debt crisis, the Promesa Act. And so these are semi-recent works here. Where this has manifested most dramatically in recent projects is in this Mapping Resistance, the Young Lords in El Barrio public art project. And in this project, I got to collaborate with Irene Maristani, the official photographer of the Young Lords and one of the founding members, East Harlem photographer, born and raised of that first Nuyorican generation, really, of the 50s in El Barrio. And we took 10 images from the Young Lords' history in El Barrio and placed them in 5 different locations where the history actually occurred, right? And we created this map. And then we did walking tours at all these sites of the history. So images like this of the Bronx March, which eventually walked down or marched down Lexington Avenue. These were Young Lords marching in solidarity with the Black Panthers and the freedom of the Panther 21, the freedom of Bobby Seale in 1969. This was located, this is Hiram, sorry. This is Iram, the photographer, who I have really loved working with the last few years as a big part of this history we're all talking about. This image is at 111th in Lexington, Young Lords Way, across from the People's Church. That's still up in the neighborhood. And so we started this in 2019, which was the 50-year anniversary of the Young Lords. And so we did over 100 walking tours with young people, with elders, with people on bikes, with folks from all over, but mainly from our neighborhood, teaching this history forward, image by image. Each image had a plaque and a history associated with it, and a map that would take you to the next one. So the original office of the Young Lords, this was an exciting image. That's a very young Juan Gonzalez standing in what was the original office storefront, was situated right across the street from where the actual office was located. This is the same block on Madison that the original Taller was also located, right? In the offices of the Real Great Society, across the street from the Young Lords. So this history is overlapped with each other like really dramatically. Denise Oliver, this is a photograph that Hiram took of her in the office of the Young Lords in that same block. Local students from local high schools on walking tours, And then we had really dramatic moments like this, where Hiram and Denise was the first woman in the central leadership of the Young Lords, and a really important part of that history. Here, standing in front of an image that Hiram took of her 50 years ago in the same spot across the street. So it was a beautiful kind of cycle of history that we got to witness through this project as we did it. The garbage offensives, this was on 3rd Avenue and 111th Street, where the actual garbage offensives took place. And so this photograph was turned into a huge billboard vinyl at that same intersection. And then things like this happen, throughout our walking tours and throughout the whole summer. This is Papo, who's pointing himself out and saying, "This is me." He interrupts the tour we're doing. He points himself out and said, "Listen, this is me when I was 15 years old. I remember this history." He told us all about the garbage offensive. And people told this story in their own words, right? Because it's a living history. And that was really, really important for us to communicate, that this is a living history. This is a community that is still here. El Barrio is still a Puerto Rican neighborhood, and our history is still alive. Our culture is still alive. So these were really powerful moments for us, and emotional moments. I love this project so much, but it gave us, it had a life that kept on going in terms of how it was activated. This is the largest image in the project that's still up on PS 109, 99th Street between 2nd and 3rd. It's also a building that I live in. It's an affordable housing building for artists. And this is another image of the March to Free the Panther 21 in 1969. So while we're doing this project, this is what's happening in Puerto Rico. It's the summer of 2019. We have the uprisings in Puerto Rico. It's the summer of resistance and the demand for Ricky Rosselló to resign after he gravely offended all of the people of the island. People crossed political lines to form the largest public protest that we've ever seen in Puerto Rico's history. It was amazing, and it was really powerful to think about the Young Lords history and this history on the island at the same time, and to now think about the parallels between this summer of resistance and the summer of resistance we had here in the US in 2020, the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement for racial justice. All of these parallels have been incredibly powerful. So while that was happening, and in this past summer, I was thinking a lot about the debt crisis. And one of the major impacts of the debt crisis and the Promesa Act in Puerto Rico, which has been a huge austerity program, has been school closures, right? Massive closures of public institutions. And public schools by the hundreds have been closed in recent years. And so I kept coming across things like this, like these school bus graveyards, right? Which were reflections of abandoned schools and a kind of reduction of education. And so we started to then look at these buses as material. And I started stripping down with a friend of mine here, Cano, in Santurce. We stripped down several buses and started turning the bus metal into protest shields. And so the armor that was used to protect children on their ways to school on the buses was now being stripped down to form an armor that would protect protesters that were fighting or protesting against austerity measures and the Junta Fiscal, the fiscal board. In this residency context, I'm also thinking about the arms and armor galleries at the Met, and very much about who we stand up for, who we fight for, and who we are in these spaces. And this is some of what that looked like in process in terms of making the shields, these school bus shields. Very much inspired by and influenced by Se Acabaron las Promesas, which is an activist group also that has formed protests against the fiscal board and against austerity every time that they meet in Puerto Rico. So that's, this is a very recent project from this last summer. This is an image of all of the shields kind of in one panel where you see the side of the bus. And the last thing I want to show is a billboard project that happened during elections. This happened right during election week in Puerto Rico. So I worked with Four Freedoms and the Wide Awakes, which is an artist collective that has done this massive national campaign of billboard projects in all 50 states and also in Puerto Rico and in DC. And so I did this billboard using the image of a sculpture that was a pro-statehood party flag from the PMP party and in the shape of a Ku Klux Klan hood, and really mocking the idea of statehood and questioning those who would align with an administration that was so outwardly racist, that was so filled with white supremacists. And keep in mind, this happens during a week when the local interim governor in Puerto Rico endorsed Trump. for president. So it was horrible. And she doesn't represent necessarily all the Puerto Rican people either, but within that party and the statehood party and these kinds of aspirations for full assimilation into the US are these problematics that I was kind of calling out. This was taken down after one day. It was removed by the comptroller's office in Puerto Rico. And so I replaced it with another billboard image, which was this, and which is Las Vidas Negras Importan, is Black Lives Matter in Spanish in a Puerto Rico context. And this ran on one of the major highways in Puerto Rico. But these were very, very recent in the week of elections. So just in the month of November, these last projects. And I'm gonna leave it there and say thank you again for letting me share this work in the context of all of this history.
Thank you very much, Miguel Luciano. Thank you, Marvella. Thank you, Marcos Dimas, for your wonderful presentations. We have 15 minutes for conversation. I would like to start from with some of the questions that are in the Q&A box. I think there's a very interesting question here that I would like to pose to all the panelists, but perhaps I would like also to rephrase it a little bit from Richie, and they asked, at what point did the Euro-Western art establishment take an interest in the birth of your movement? And that was posed when Marcos was presenting. Marcos, I will have to ask you to unmute yourself on your screen so you can also be heard. I think this is an interesting, I mean, among several others, but this is an interesting point of interest in the conversation, which is really something that Marvella spelled out, and I think the Taller Boricua historical show sort of points out to also, which is the inscription of the exclusion and the inclusion, this sort of friction between the two of Latino art in a historical canon against like a larger backdrop of United States art. So I would like, I mean, Marvella, you are with a very wonderful mandate as the Director of Curatorial and Education at the Self-Help Graphics. So I would like to take a little bit your perspective on that, and also from the other panelists.
So with regards to that question about
in terms of the Chicano art movement.
Yeah, I think that within self-help graphics, I think from the artists that I have met and I've learned about, we have a combination of both self-taught and those who went to school and received obviously European training or Western influence, or the New York even influence, the New York school. But again, with the Chicano movement, it's about, again, about revisiting their cultures, going back to understanding the indigenous culture and reclaiming that and adopting it, and then creating a new imagery. And I think it just goes back to Marcos. It's a period where they're investigating and understanding where they come from, their roots, and understanding where they are and the environment, and combining all of that and experimenting and learning this new term of Chicano and self-identifying as Chicano. And then therefore it comes out in the work.
Marcos, perhaps you want to say something about this. I think in the slides I presented of your work in the beginning, there's an interest of your work in sort of indigenous, non-European imagery and tropes, not only in terms of representation, but also I think how you understand the art objects, how you understand, you know, in terms of your assemblages and all that. So perhaps you want to elaborate a little bit.
Well, I made a decision way back in 69, 70 to become a cultural worker. and not to chase the dream of commercial success as an artist. So that forged my participation in everything I've done since. I could have stayed as a pop artist and maybe even gained some fame and fortune, but I decided to become to do work that was relevant to my identity, and therefore I took over. I took the road to become a cultural worker, and and along with the practice of doing posters and doing demonstrations and doing educational programs and all the other things that we've had to do to survive. I also created a lot of personal work, and I was I think at the forefront of a lot of the work that's been called the alternative arts movement, which incorporated a lot of the artists that started in the early 70s to do relevant work that was relevant to their community and to their historical background and to the identity question. So I created a lot of assemblages and along with Jorge Soto and Sally Cruz and a whole bunch of other people created an aesthetic also that's notable and it's worth looking into. So I think that's been the road I took and the road I'm still following. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, no, it's a very great take on it, Miguel. Perhaps I mean, I'd be curious to get your insights about the question. You know, there's someone else, Abraham Chavez, who asked something different here. Say, how's your art scene? I guess that was during your presentation. How's your art scene viewed by outside the Latino community? Greetings from Ciudad de Mexico. I think this is an interesting point also in terms of like culture-specific institutions, culture-specific conversation, ethnocentric conversations. I mean, are we interested in the inscription in the mainstream art history? I mean, we can't be bothered with that. What's your take on that, Miguel?
I mean, you know, I can just reflect on what my experience has been looking at this history in relationship to you know, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and like the community that I live in, right, in East Harlem and Barrio. And so it's, you know, the Met is walking distance from El Barrio, but is in a whole different world, right? In the sense that the Upper East Side is such a different community from East Harlem. And so it reminds, you're reminded daily that, you know, we live in very stratified societies, right? With huge social class divisions, racial division, all kinds of divisions, right? And the thing that has been really powerful to reflect on the last couple of years at these 50-year anniversary marks for both institutions is how important that the work was of those institutions and Museo and the Taller, which were both for us, by us institutions, right? Grassroots institutions in their foundation. And how important that those missions are 50 years later still, right? And what I mean by that is that, you know, the Taller is really the only Puerto Rican organization, arts organization that's artist run still alive in our neighborhood. And Museo has become a different kind of institution, right? And I appreciate that both exist very much. But it does make me think about the future of our community, the future of the arts for Puerto Rican artists, for other Latinx artists as well. But I'm saying this about Puerto Rican artists because we are at a sort of turning point from one generation to the next. And that's it. And these are things that I think are in the minds of many of us, right? As we think about the legacy and future of our communities moving forward. So I sort of am answering a question with a question, but I wanted to sort of pose that to the group in terms of thinking about how you imagine the future of your communities, right? Moving forward. And Marcos mentioned something earlier that for me was really interesting in the sense that printmaking is not the same, doesn't have the same urgency in the same way that it did at one time at the Taller, for example, right? It was a response, kind of a medium that responded to the times that people were living in. And it also had a history connected to the print on the island. It was, in other spaces that were very politically and socially informed. And I wonder like what the medium of today is imagined as,
Yeah, I mean, I think where you're taking this is super interesting, because one thing that also Marvella's presentation strongly conveyed is that the access to the means of production is something that is still very important to the community she serves at Self-Help, right? So that she has a printmaking studio going on, but also that, the altar of the Day of the Dead, which is a tradition that we also celebrate at our Museo, and that we also understand as something that needs to be refreshed and needs to reflect a moment of now. I mean, the access, to this means of production, to this, means of visibility, to this means of creation, this access is still very relevant. Also, I think looking at the show that we have in our galleries now at our Museo, the Taller Boricua show, I find a lot of this work very resonant today, not only because of the themes, obviously. I mean, with social justice, it's something that it's really, and racial justice, something that was really something the order of the day during the whole 2020, and it's going to be the same this year. But also, I think this access to the means of production, this access to language, in order to create a sense of urgency with language. So I don't know if it's printmaking itself, right? So, but for sure, this conjunction of text and image that we find in several of these images, I think it's something that's going on still today. And it's very important, this idea of art understood as a means of circulation and communication of social justice, for instance. I mean,
I'd like to just go back on to that first question from Mexico. It goes back to a conversation we had in our meeting, how for self-help graphics, the Chicano art, Latinx artist, Chicanx artist is seen on the narrative of the American art in the US too. and so how is that? And then, obviously it's not at the same level as a white male artist, cost or the prices, the value of the artwork, and how much it's frequently they are exhibited within these mainstream institutions. You definitely can say that an artwork, whether a painting, sculpture, or a print, is definitely not the same value of a female or a woman identified artist. So that value, financial value, is definitely not perceived equally. And I think for going back to print, I mean, the Taller has maybe has gone a different path with self-help graphics. Again, the print studio, the print production, and the artists that we bring in is equally still at the core as it was at the beginning. And I think print itself is still very strong. I think working at self-help graphics, it has opened my eyes to the many older and new print studios because of accessibility and the distribution. And the platform that that the print, I think, allows. I don't know where I heard this, and maybe it's just BS, but I heard it was like once it was like the print is the poor artist studio. I mean, medium, and
Mm,
so maybe it is for distribution, um, but nevertheless, the perception wise, the organizations of color, there's still a lot of more work for us to do ahead, and but as for us, for self-help graphics, definitely the print is still in the forefront of our work.
Yeah, I would like just to add like a 2 cents to that, that maybe it's not only the print as a medium that I see so much, but in the upcoming Triennale that the Museo is presenting starting in the springtime, in several works, it's not about the medium of print, but there's a sense of urgency, of message conveying, of using information, on using, image like urgent image making that really connects with printmaking of that era and, several of the artistic values. So I think
Just very
that's,
quickly, yeah.
go
I
ahead.
don't want to take up too much space, but we just also this summer, because of COVID and just the liability of putting our staff and artists out out there during the protest, we did use print and live printed Black Lives Matter posters and distributed them. And so yes, going in that line of mass distribution, most definitely, I think it still serves that purpose. Much like I think that's when I see it across the social media platforms, I think so many artists are still using the print for that urgency. Because we think about larger projects, maybe like Miguel, like the one that you're working on, it takes a lot of work and time to build and develop. But that print, it just, here you go, boom, within hours, you're out and it's out
Yeah.
there. The message is out.
Yeah, fundamentally, though, it was like even with the project with Maristani, with the photographs, like that public art project was about the democracy of the art, of the experience, and the artwork. So the medium was made public and it's unmediated, right? So it's not behind glass. It's on the street. People could touch it, be right next to it, take pictures with it, etc. And that was really exciting. And I know that Iran was really excited about that because it was about returning that very history to the community that shaped that history and that created that history. And that's what I love so much about that project, is that as site-specific images too, they had a real power in those locations. But I was really blown away by how accessibility, right, still makes such a difference, right? And it makes me think more and more about sort of like, art in public spaces, about the print as a medium that still is a democratic form, and the spirit of a lot of this work that was about public distribution and educational campaigns, for political awareness. It was political education.
Mm-hmm. I think what's beautiful too about Miguel, about your work, and seeing these photographs of these old times, and then like when I think about the students, the younger generations are coming in, they didn't know that this happened in their backyard, all of this history, and so you're bringing it out and accessibility. It's again that ongoing question about the white cube, right? Bringing the artwork out there and then bringing people in, and so that I think that's really great. Just seeing I can imagine your face really lines up when you see people looking at it and wanting and eager to learn more.
Yeah, totally. I just want to underline one thing that came up that I thought was really important, and Marcos alluded to it earlier. And I think about the Young Lords. I can't mention the Young Lords without mentioning the Black Panthers. And when we think about, the Puerto Rican arts movement, and you have to think about the Black Power movement, right? And so like hearing how those histories overlap with one another, influence one another, especially in Harlem, is really important also to think about. And so I can't wait to see, more shows that actually look at how those histories overlapped and complemented one another, and built together different platforms of resistance. And because I think remembering that is part of understanding how we're not like reinventing it, you know what I mean? That there's actually a legacy and a history that informs where we are now in terms of understanding how to build solidarity.
I would like to thank you all for your participation here. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our program. We have to wrap up at 7:30. We have great participation of our audience tonight through the chat box and the Q&A questions. So I want to also thank everyone who joined us tonight and who share questions and comments. Those who were not answered, we'll make sure to forward to our panelists tonight. I just wanted to ask you, Marcos, if you have any final remarks to share before we wrap up. And I have prepared a surprise for the end of the evening, so.
Yeah, well, yes, I mean, I have a few things to talk about. But I'll just mention it briefly. It's true, the print media has been relegated, like the young woman says, to the media of the working class, of the poor, and but its efficiency, like she mentioned also, of getting a poster out, printing it and distributing it. I don't think anything surpasses that in terms of the visual art. A painting is on the wall, a sculpture is in the park, whatever, but a print gets out to the masses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that medium is still valuable. Mm-hmm. The other thing I need to talk about is also that I think we should maintain these dialogues, because the way it is, we have to decide whether we're going to be in limbo between the commercial aspect of being an artist and the activist aspect of being an artist. Because I think people are still caught up in that idea, oh yeah, I'm going to be an activist, but eventually I'm going to be John Michael Basquiat, I'm going to be, you know, part of the Andy Warhol gang and whatever, you know, so you know, that's a real touchy situation, but it's something that I think the artists have to deal with it within themselves. You know, I mean, we got to get real about what it is that you're doing and what it is that's governing your life. You know, between the commercial capitalism and doing advocacy work, you know, there's a big gap, I think, that needs to be resolved. I don't know. We have to think about it and talk about it, I guess. I don't know. You know?
Your work has certainly been very, very inspiring. And also your final remarks, what you say about I'd say the efficiency of prints. I think it's really fascinating, and I think it's a great takeaway. But before we wrap up, I would like to share with you a quick clip from a film that Marcos just finished editing. This is a total treasure. It's footage from 1972, right, Marcos?
About 1972, yes.
Footage from 1972, wonderful. We're gonna just give it a nugget, like a quick clip in this wonderful, wonderful film, Art for the People by Marcos Dimas and Willie Correa's.
Art for All.
Art for All.
Yeah.
It's gonna be available starting tonight and through the weekend at El Museo's website. So we have the exhibition up. I would like to encourage all of you to come and visit Saturday and Sunday. This is Last Chance. The website, which is a wonderful resource. And now on a limited time basis, this fantastic film by Marcos. So thank you so much, Marvella, Marcos, Miguel Luciano, and all participants, and have a wonderful evening.
As a gesture of solidarity and union, we adopted and personalized indigenous Taino symbols, which became insignias that symbolically linked us with our ancestral root culture from the Caribbean island of Puerto Rico. The Aborigine who had vanished from the face of Borinquen and had resided in our souls, the spirit of freedom that had disappeared into a number of myths, folk tales, and anthropological theories. That mythical being was being resurrected at the corner of revolution and of change. Our first workshop space was located at the corner of 111th Street and Madison Avenue. It was a 4-story building we inherited from the real